I'm talking with Howard Brandston, lighting designer, passionate educator, and a past president and fellow of the IES. So Howard, you are known both as an icon and an iconoclast. How can that be? Tell us about this.
That's true. And I guess the icon is something that I earned. The iconoclast is something that I was taught as a young man, to be straightforward, to be honest, and to only say the truth, and always be polite. My parents were very strict about that. So whenever things came up that got my attention, I would say exactly what I thought about them. That always wasn't well received, but it did have some impact.
Talk about some of those.
I would go along and write all these things. And one day, a couple of guys from the Illuminating Engineering Society came into my office and said, "Howard, you're always critical of this and that. You have suggestions about all kinds of things, but you're not an active member." I said, "Well, I don't always agree with all the things that you guys do, so I just mention things as I see them and let it go." He said, "Well, we don't like that. We want you to come and be somebody here. We will publish anything you have to say. We'll put your name on the masthead of the magazine, so there's a contributing editor and all that. It's fine." So I thought, well, I grew up in the theater. So the first article I'll write for LD&A was the benefits of growing up in the theater. And I published that, and it was very nice. I was thrilled. The energy crisis hit. And I was having disagreements with the standards committees about the recommended practices. So I thought, oh, here's a chance that I can put this in print. I'm a contributing editor to the magazine. So I wrote an article, this was 1975, called "A Little Light on Sight," which was simultaneously published, because I wrote it as a scientific paper, by the National Society for the Prevention of Blindness. So the two of the magazines came out together. And when the society read the magazine, they thought that having somebody write articles like that might not be such a good idea. So they had my name removed from the magazine, and they had me barred from all committee memberships. That had no impact on me, because if there was something that needed to be addressed, there's something in me that said I could still be the voice. Now, the editor at that time was Charles Beersley, and he published everything. All the negative letters were in there month after month. One time he put a heading across the whole page, "Good grief, it's Howard Brandston." And that was a sort of an incentive to, if there was going to be a gap closed between the art and science of illumination, I could be a little bit of that voice. So I took that as a challenge to pay attention, to be more attentive to what the IES was doing. And Kurt Frank became president, and he got the ban lifted. So, I suddenly was accepted, or more accepted again. But there was never a hard feeling.
Talk a little bit about growing up in the theater and the kind of mentors you had over the years, and what influence they had on you.
Well, I was really fortunate, in my grammar school days, to be allowed to be in the plays. I got my share of the parts, whatever was happening. And I loved the theater. I can draw. It's just a gift, And I would also love to go to the art classes. So between the theater and the art, I was having a wonderful education. And I thought, wow, when I get out of here, I'm going to go to the high school for artists. And two of the teachers, a Catherine Grayson and a D.C. Papay, said, no, you're not. You're too smart. We're going to send you to a school, very special, and you will have good time in the art and theater there. So I was sent to Lincoln High School in Coney Island, kind of a disadvantaged area. And there were two teachers that were put there by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. They were active people in his WPA program. Leon Friend to advance the arts, and Gustav Bloom to advance theater. He put them in that remote high school to give disadvantaged kids a chance to deal with first-class educators. And I had the benefit of Leon Friend and Gustav Bloom. I can tell you that these early mentors, and Catherine Grayson and D.C. Papay, had a big influence on my life. As a member of the art squad, I would prepare the material for class every day. Every now and again, Leon would get up in front of class and say, in front of you is a blank piece of paper. That's the opportunity for a work of art. Let's see what you can do. That stuck with me. That just was forever imprinted. And I would say when I had my own piece of paper, am I preparing a work of art here? And that was a challenge. And Gustav's direction as a director and theater aficionado made me look at the history of all the plays I was doing. So there was a difference between a modern comedy and Shakespeare. And there was this getting a sense of the time that these plays existed and the culture of the play, of the people who were involved in that play, gave me a broader sense of the world around me, between the art and the understanding of the difference of the culture of the times, the way you dressed, what possessed people to dress like this. Things like that were things that aroused my curiosity, and their constant assistance in saying, did you consider this when you did that? They never answered a question. They always had considerations that I had never properly overlooked, or overlooked completely. But they got my curiosity aroused, and I followed up on it. And that was probably the most significant part of my high school education.
Curiosity. It sounds like it's quite important. I'd like to jump forward and ask, as an educator, how do you help students develop their curiosity about the world around them, and how you help them put that into their lighting design practice?
Well, as I began to have the opportunity to teach a little, I began to hone my means of reaching out to the students. And I knew clearly from my own experience in college that you quickly could get bored because some of the teachers had used the same syllabus for the last several decades. And there had to be something that was new that would keep you aroused, that would bring special attention. I also knew that after a while you got used to a teacher, and the novelty of first being in their class would wear off. So I thought when I got my first chance to teach, which was a rare opportunity, just out of school, I got a call from the Ford Foundation saying, we're doing a teaching methodology study. We would like you to be part of that. I said, well, how did you get to me? He said, we have decided that we're going to get young experts who had never taught. And you never taught per se, so you're a perfect person. You are the assistant to Stanley McCandless, the guy who was the god of lighting at the time, and you're fairly fresh out of school, young. You're a good candidate for our program. Come in for an interview. So I went to see the Ford Foundation lady, a few Ford Foundation people, and they asked me, if you were given this job to be this experimental teacher, and they explained clearly, I'd get a year to try to learn, I'd get a year to hone my whatever I was doing, and the third year the Ford Foundation group would measure my output. I said, that's perfect, I love that. He said, so if we give you this job, what will you do? I said, I don't know. He said, what do you mean you don't know? We're the Ford Foundation. We have everything but your blood type. You are a good candidate. He said, I don't know because I don't know the students. When I meet the students, I will then figure out what I should do. And I'll continue to teach them in that first year till I run out of time. That's what I will have done. And then I'll hone that for the next year. So they sort of demurred a bit. Said, we'll call you back. I got a call back. I was pleasantly surprised. He said, we've decided to take a chance with you. He said, but in college, and you can't forgotten already, the college has a catalog. And in there it tells you what you're going to get in each of these courses. We can't put down you don't know what you're going to get. So if we give you this job, you got to write something for the college catalog. I said, I'll do that. Get this thing to be a teacher, a real teacher. So I wrote some blithe statement about learning about technical theater, and I got the job. And I began to think about the things that I thought were shortcomings in college. And I also thought about it'll be novel for the young theater kids to be taught by Stanley McCandless's assistant. And I said they'll soon get that novelty will soon wear off. So I've got to come up with some method to keep them excited about this, to arouse their curiosity, all the things that Leon Friend and Gustav Bloom did for me. So I said, I will bring a guest lecturer every now and again. And being in the art community and this and that, I had lots of contacts. So in my first semester, we're going along through getting these things done, challenging the students, very, very challenging stuff. One of the young ladies came and said, do you know you give more work out than any other teacher in this school? I said, I do. How do you know? He said, my father is the chairman of the math department. I said, oh. He said, in deference to your father, I will allow you to drop this course with no penalty. There was silence. So time came, I brought in my brother-in-law, a very famous artist named Roy Lichtenstein. The class just lit up. I said, this is it. All I got to do every now and again is bring in one of my friends and keep the class on the ball. And I applied that and honed that over the years, many years. I got to be a visiting professor in a curriculum that I helped create at Cooper Union. And I brought in my first lighting class. I said, your first assignment is to write a composition for next week telling me why there is no such thing as color. There was a deep breath. Cooper Union's quite an art school, an architecture school. Then I thought, if I'm not going to do this. So I had a very close acquaintance. I said, I'll get this guy to teach the course. And in order to really amplify the impact of this, I'm going to hold it in the auditorium. The auditorium at Cooper Union seats 1,100. And then I figured, okay, I've got this superstar coming to tell why there's no such thing as color. That superstar was Oliver Sacks. And I published the fact that Oliver Sacks would be giving this talk. It would be free. Anybody could attend. And sure enough, I got there early to greet Oliver. I didn't want him to be the first one to walk into the auditorium. And I roped off a section of the seats for my class and for friends. I get down there early, and there's the president of the school, and the chairman of the department, and a bunch of other people all milling around. And one of the guys says to the president, "What's this rope here? What's this rope around the seats?" They said, "Ask him." He put it there. So they point to me, and the guy walks over and he said, "Well, we know you're new here, Howard, but in Cooper Union, on any of these open lectures, we have a tradition of first come, first serve for seating." I said, "Welcome to my class."
So forgive me, I look around and I see lots of color here. Tell me what you mean when you say there's no such thing as color, or what Oliver Sacks said.
It's a neurological impact, and you put together these different neurological things and create the color. The brain creates the color.
So the color is in your mind, it's not in the objects that you see.
What you are interpreting of what you see is in your mind. There's a wonderful book on that by Semir Zeki, one of the guys neurologist who really is into this, how the brain functions around these things. And I wanted them to see that, because until your brain does that, that color doesn't exist.
So you are a mentor and an inspiration to many emerging professionals here. If you were to ask that question of the people that you met over the years at this entry level into the society, how many of them would understand and embody what you've just been talking about?
Not many.
Now, why is that, do you think?
Well, there is this gap between science and design. And in art and in the theater, there are no rules. There's nothing. In the theater, you're there to do a good play. There's nothing that you have to meet or challenged by, except the desire to be creative and do something. And the inspiration for all of that comes from the theater and the art. You don't want to copy. You want to be creative. You want to bring something new, something fresh to your production, because people who come to the theater usually see lots of plays, and you want to grip them with something new, no matter what the type of play it is. But you want to bring this special touch that's yours to the production. That's a very important inspirational tool, having that motivation to be creative. Being creative is extremely simple. It's just doing something that's never been done. So if you haven't seen it and you do it, you've never seen it done. That counts.
And is this part of what you like to inculcate in students?
Absolutely. That's the basic heart of it. That's what gave me the leg up to do this.
Talk about transitioning from theater to architectural lighting design. And how did that happen, and what did you bring from the theater experience to architectural lighting?
Well, working for Stanley McCandless, he was an architect. And he did his apprenticeship with McKim, Mead & White. And I loved the discipline and of that early architectural training, McCandless came to work every day in a three-piece suit, the watch chain, and very distinguished gentleman. And I thought, I'm going to just keep learning from this. He was always polite, straightforward, and I thought, wow, as long as I can keep that creative process, we would design shows, design new theaters, design something. He gave me permission to light shows. And I would just take time off, and then I'd make the time up in working for him. Sort of a transition point, a real transition point. I was also working in architecture because he was an architect and we did buildings. The transition came, I did 2 shows that closed in one day. Well, it became quite clear that if I wanted to make a living, that probably a better avenue would be on the architecture side. So I went back to school to study architecture. And I found the challenges of architecture were a bit of a hindrance to me. I was not used to being hindered by anything. So one day I'm sitting there with my mentor, McCandless, saying, there's all these rules, codes, and things that we have to comply with. So I thought I'd make up my own rule. And he said, what's that? I said, rules are a substitute for thinking, and I'm not going to stop thinking. And so I just blithely would do whatever thoughts occurred to me. I'd have to run them by McCandless, who would sort of look at them somewhat askance as he did some of the things I did at school, just. But we did a lot of very nice work. But the rules never entered as a hindrance to anything.
Do you think that lighting has more rules today than it did when you were beginning? And what impact do you think that has?
Well, I think that some of the recommended practices and some of the things that have come down have been a great help. There's a lot of very, very fine things being done. But recently, with the almost paranoid view of saving energy, that these restrictions have somewhat reached the point of strangulation of creativity. And so I'm very concerned about that. I think that the IES has somewhat lost they are no longer the authority. The government has sort of superseded by placing these restrictions. And I worked very hard for the IES during the energy crisis. I was appointed by David Patterson to be the IES representative on the first Architectural Engineering Energy Conference Committee. And I would go to Washington every month, participate with the other professionals, the architects, engineers, etc. And my main contribution at first was to sit there and listen to what everybody was saying. I was not intimidated or anything like that, but I just wanted to get my own ground rules set. And then if I didn't like anything, I'd say, did you consider the unintended consequences of what might happen if we did that? That would get a little bit of a discussion going, and essentially they would drop it. The next month, the same thing occurred. Did you consider the unintended consequences of taking an action like that? The next time I was leaning forward to do that, the guys from the DOE were just furious. And this very somewhat portly but distinguished gentleman from the NSPE, that's the National Society for Professional Engineers, got up and said, "Excuse me, sir," Southern gentleman, said, our young friend from lighting, says, and all of us here, we might amongst ourselves agree on nothing except to disagree with you. That was not funny. You may be laughing, but I did not think that was funny. I was really smitten by that. I said, Howard, what have you brought to this? You sit here and you listen and you make comments, but it's always pointing out, a potential flaw, which is good, but you have brought nothing to this thing. So I went home and I wrote the mathematical equation that was used to set the upper power limit for lighting for the energy code. That I suddenly was now the hero. But all of that, I think all of that training, all of that curiosity, that understanding of all of the when I'm working on a design team, all of these fellow professionals sitting out there in the audience, working on this problem of what are we doing in the energy crisis, that was a great help for me.
So today we've got rules on power density, we have rules on controls that are embodied in energy codes, we have rules on light source efficacy, we have rules, at least in some states, on color. We have, if not rules, but guidelines on horizontal illuminance. If you could eliminate one of those rules, which would be your top choice to free up creativity with the least harm to the environment?
Power density. It would remove power density because power density has nothing to do with good lighting design. Good lighting design is only efficient if it is successful. And anything that limits the potential for success is a significant handicap. So the power density numbers are, at this point, in my opinion, just mine. That doesn't mean there isn't some good work being done, but those may not be the ultimate project. So that would be the one that I would choose. And when I look at the motivation for doing this, it's clear. These guys go away in conferences to save energy, and they can agree on nothing. So they have to show that they're doing something. They pick on lighting. Lighting has the least defenses. So they create these things, and lighting is all pervasive, so it looks good to save this. California's got a real rigid code. They were bragging, they said umpteen $1 million per year, saved the use of energy. Well, I looked at that, and I found, wow, look at that. They saved $1 a year per person for saving all this money. The number is huge, but there's a huge number of people there. Is it worth $1 a person to ruin good lighting? No, in my opinion.
Talk about your design process.
I look at design process as something that each artist has got to create for themselves. So I encourage everybody to have their own design process. And mine is a flexible thing that has evolved over years. And every time some new item, sparks my inspiration, I note that. I find a place for it in the design process. I brought that book because I have illustrated my design process in there with the admonition: don't copy it, create your own. and it's just an evolution. It's a process of sifting through potential solutions. There's not a single solution that's going to solve every lighting problem, but in this search for the right solution, if you come up with enough alternatives, you have a better chance of doing it. So I never I never present part of a project until I've got all these areas of the project that I've sifted through. So I get these little stacks of drawings that I've made, and at some point in time, I pick them out together, pull out this miscellaneous assortment of notions, because they're only notions. They don't become concepts until they're down there as a selected conceptual group. And I show that to the client. Then I have the discipline. I don't rely on my talking to the client because my personality might have some influence on them. So I write it. So they get a written description of everything I've described to them, and I draw it, sketch form, so that they can see, read, and think about what I said. And if there's any criticisms at all, I can apply that to my job. And those feedbacks are the things that give me the clues to make the jobs work well.
This is off camera, but you may recall long before Anthony Hopkins talked about Marcus Aurelius, you did. And in one of our very early conversations in the 1980s, you talked about the importance of first principles. Talk about how that influences your design now.
The most important thing is to have an open mind. All the things that you're considering, you have to view with skepticism until you've proven them.
That almost sounds like the opposite of the freewheeling theater student who observed no rules. So talk about what you mean by this sense of truly coming to grips with the reality of it.
When I get an open mind, all the rules have been wiped out. They don't exist. And anything that gets put into one of those early notions is just a free thinking thing. When I'm evaluating all the notions, trying to get a concept, that's when you have to bring in a little skepticism. Curiosity has to mount to be sure you've tested all of the potential consequences, and then before you make that presentation to the client.
Sounds like science is an important part of the artistry that you're talking about.
Absolutely. That is why I think closing this gap is such an important imperative today, with the government stepping in so inadvisedly. I think their intentions are good, but they don't have a holistic view of what the problems really are, and so they're making a mistake. They're putting all their eggs in a lumen basket, and that is a mistake.
What can the IES do to be a more effective advocate for this holistic view of lighting?
They need to bring a greater concentration of art into the program. If you listen to all the things that are talked about today, it's virtually all science. It's all saving energy. It's all putting all the carrots are in the wrong basket.
Besides personal fulfillment, what do you see the role of art in the process of design? What does it provide in benefits to the client or to society overall?
It provides a benefit of having significant satisfaction with each place they go that is lighted. That is a significant benefit. It's really important. The measure of success of any project, the measure of that success is how well it is received. If it is not well received, I don't care how much energy you save, the total thing is a loss.
Up to this point in your career, what would you consider your greatest professional success?
I've had the good fortune to do all kinds of work. You know, I've done almost every particular project type that exists, you know, in 60 some odd years of practice. So I don't have a favorite job. I have some that are certainly more recognized, like the Statue of Liberty, you know, or the Petronas Towers in Malaysia, or London Bridge City in England. You know, there's some significant, you know, things that catch your eye. But some very small jobs can have significant importance and shows the value of really thinking about what it is you wish to achieve. You got to plan what it is you wish to see. How is this going to accomplish that? Well, I got a job to do, a small high school in the area of the Bronx that you would prefer not to attend. And the goal was to make this place, this new school and its library, open to the public and welcoming to the public, and an open invitation to the public to draw on this facility. Those are wonderful goals. The architect and I conjured up many notions before coming to some solutions. And since it was a high school in the Bronx, the budget was almost non-existent. So we had to think about how we're going to do this special, open, wonderful place for the community to feel welcome and comfortable there. We finished the job. We went away for a while. Then the two of us decided we're going to go back and take a look and see how we did. We're going to take our own quiet, unannounced walk through. So he and I go up the steps, we wander in, we go into the library section. There's a group of old ladies sitting at one of the tables. So we sort of wander over to see what they're doing. And I say, "Excuse me, what are you ladies doing here?" He said, look up at me, "We're doing our food stamps." "Why are you doing your food stamps here?" He said, "Mister, this place is so much nicer than where we live, you have no idea."
That is a neat story. I really like that.
That's the benefit.
So one of the areas in which science is moving ahead, besides the aspect of energy, is a deeper understanding of how light affects the health of people in spaces. What's your thinking on this?
I think that's very, very interesting. But when I look at what they're trying to do, they don't really give you a ground basis for it. And if they could do that, that would really make the idea of how to realize that goal more accessible. It would make it clearer to the person who's doing it. And I'll explain that to you. Depending on where you live, going from the equator, as you creep north, like to New York to 42 degrees north latitude, you keep moving north and north, and pretty soon you're in areas where there's very little daylight. They talk about daylight being so important. What amount of daylight do you take where you have real high intensity to fulfill your need for this circadian enrichment? If you knew for each segment of the Earth's division what that basic line of daylight is, you could do what the Russians do. They don't have the daylight in the north. So they get all the students in their skivvies and they pour light on them for an hour to fill that need. They don't know exactly what they're doing. They know that this does the job of enriching and enlivening the kids. So they do it. It's a very practical thing to do. So it would be nice if they, instead of coming up with all this stuff, if we had a clear understanding that when I get up, I now live outside of New York, I get up every morning at 5 o'clock to take my dog out. You know, I spend a half an hour in that daylight. That's probably all I need. I don't need to worry about the rest of it. When I'm doing that, I can't provide daylight inside. My house is a daylighted house. I did that when I rebuilt this 18th century farmhouse. You know, I put in new windows, this, that, or whatever. So I don't have to turn on the lights very often, except in the winter. But I get my daylight. I go out, I go hiking, I do this or that. I'm getting a full 100% total enrichment. When I was teaching at RPI, every student got a spectroscope and a light meter. And they were taught how to use the light meter. They were taught how to think about how using that spectroscope. So it was really clear to me that they understand the spectral power distribution of every light source they knew. And you can't see SPDs with your bare eye, but with the spectroscope you can see the SPD instantly. Now, that famous neurologist that I brought into my Cooper Union classroom, Oliver Sacks, was having dinner at my house one night. He said to me, "Do you know, Howard, this scientist said that one day every educated man will carry a spectroscope." I said, "Oliver, do you have a spectroscope?" He said, "Well, I do, but it's at home." I said, "I have one." I reached in my pocket and pulled out my little spectroscope. Well, his associate, Kate Edgar, told me that I created a monster. What did I do? He said, every time Oliver sees a new source, he stops the car, gets out, takes out this little spectroscope and looks at it. He is curious to see. When you learn to do that, you can see what parts of the spectrum are missing. So each one of these light sources, man-made light sources, doesn't have the power of the sun. But with the spectroscope, you can see immediately. You can't get a measured view, but you can get a notion of what parts of the spectrum are missing. Do we know what those parts are doing from these sources? I'm not sure we do. But it would be good to know a little bit about this. I'm not sure that I've seen that kind of design. I use that, the design, because the theater guys last year wrote a very interesting article about color. And they said there are certain colors that we can't get with the that we can't dial up the color exactly we want. So we have to go to tungsten halogen spotlights and gels to get the color perfect.
Howard, talk about learning to see, the book that you wrote.
Learning to see is something I felt that I had to put in print, because most of the lighting textbooks that I've seen, most of the books on lighting, don't really cover design in its pure art form. They bring too much of the technology, other things into it, and there's too much of an almost reverence to some of the restrictions, and I'm totally opposed to that. So I thought, if I gotta put this down in writing, you know. And I thought, who are some of my early mentors? Well, somebody I never met, who Stanley McCandless knew him, was Charles Proteus Steinmetz. And I had light radiation and illumination. And the book was inspiration to me, because in the book he says, if when you hit some of these mathematical premises and you can't understand them, so just skip by them and keep going through the book. You might get aware of what's going on with them later, but so if they don't let them bog you down, just keep going right through the book. So I did that. I went from end to end, and then I went back to see what it was. The other book that influenced me was A Method of Lighting the Stage by Stanley McCandless. I said to myself, if he could put all of this, all these basic principles into 150 pages, I should be able to put what I want to do into a similar amount. So if I skip all of the math and the things that are important, and I do this, what McCandless did, I will come up with a skinny book, which I did. I took all of the math, all of the formulas, and everything you need to do a design, and I put them in an appendix in the back. That was coaching from my dead mentor, Steinmetz, and now my now dead mentor, McCandless.
But you didn't title the book Learning to Light. You titled it Learning to See. So talk about that.
You can't do lighting unless you know what it is you wish to see. And you have to learn to do that. And you can be not told how to do it. You have to be inspired to do it. So one way of doing that is never answer a question with an answer. Only answer a question with a consideration. When you finally go through the considerations, you will have created the answer, and you will remember it. If you're told, you might forget it.
Can you give me an example of this in practice?
That's not quite as easy to do when you're, but I'm going to give you an example from this convention today. And this is not a criticism. This is an observation. I looked at the bridge that was built in Portland, and I said, wow, look at that. There is a lighting design that doesn't express the purpose of a bridge. How can you reach into what is a bridge without understanding its purpose? Simply put, its purpose is to join two communities, or to join two areas. And so that roadway, that link, that makes the ability to get from here to there, from there to back to here, wasn't there in that design. But what was there was, from my point of view, a discotheque, show of light and color, and sort of trying to be a work of art. But without the whole purpose of the bridge being expressed, it was less meaningful to me. Whereas if you looked at the one that Chiming showed, there was a clear line joining the two areas. And the rest was just doing that. And there was no color. And it was dignified and warm and welcoming.
The essence of that example is to ask, what is the fundamental purpose? What do I want people to take away from this experience?
Right. Yes, and they should see it. They don't have to have it quite clearly enunciated as I did, but they have to be able to see that. They will inherently register. That will register with them.
Do you have favorite exercises that you like students to do to help them open their eyes, so to speak?
Yes, I have a couple. The most important one is that anytime you enter a space, if it has any impact on you at all, I want you to think of only one thing that you would change that would improve it. That will make you dissect this thing really carefully. So the students get an exercise every year of finding one place on campus that they would change with one thing.
So you start with something that is largely good. and make it better.
Yes.